Hey, welcome to the channel. We hope that you enjoy today's stories and check out the chapters on the video to see all the stories for today. But before we get into this video, subscribe to the channel and hit that bell icon to get notified when we release a new video. So let's get into the video.
I used to give haunted tours of an old town and had some paranormal experiences. I used to be a tour guide in a popular tourist town in Tennessee. My job at the time was to take people on a circuitous 2-mile walk around the town, telling them the ghost stories of the people who had lived there. During the summer, tours started a little before sundown and would end well after dark. All in all, it would take us roughly 1 to 2 hours to get through a tour, depending on the walking speed of my group. Just to preface this, the vast majority of stories we told were not true. They were either largely exaggerated, entirely fabricated, or simply gruesome stories of local murders with a paranormal twist added at the end with the ghost of the killer still lurking about. I didn't write the script, don't blame me. In fact, I visited a local museum and sourced authentic ghost stories from a curator in order to add a few of my own to the tour, which was actually authentic. That said, there were a handful of times during my stint as a tour guide in which I had experiences that were not so easily explained. In this post, I'm going to detail 3 of the most interesting ones. Story 1. One of the tools we got for our tours were EMF detectors, which I'm sure you're mostly all familiar with. They're intended to scan for electromagnetic frequencies and will detect the relative strength of a signal they pick up. Now, just because one of these things goes off doesn't mean you're seeing a ghost. They also pick up power lines and will go off like crazy near a generator. But if you're in the middle of nowhere and you suddenly get a strong signal, it's worth looking into. Now these detectors we used had about 5 lights on them, changing in hue from green to yellow to red. Red means no signal, and green indicates a strong signal. The light never goes below red unless you turn the thing off, that's the baseline. At the end of our tour, we would come to an old graveyard, nobody buried there in at least 100 years. After I did my thing with the final story, people would wander around and look at the graves with flashlights and scare themselves like crazy. But one night as they were wandering, a man called me over to see one of the graves. I went over and had a look and saw what the problem was. Whenever he passed his EMF detector over this particular grave, all the lights would turn off. The entire machine would turn itself off when it was over this grave and turn back on as soon as you moved it away. We tried with a couple of other graves, but only this one had the effect. We were curious about the grave, so we tried to read the name of the person, but the headstone was too worn down for us to read it. The first name Thomas was faintly able to be read, but the surname was too hard to read. We had the whole group, 5 people, leaning over it at this point trying to read it when we all heard the same thing. As one of the groups wondered aloud what the man's surname was, a loud voice from behind us shouted, "Whaley!" As you may have guessed, there was nobody behind us when we turned around, and we called the tour to a close shortly after that. I never messed with that specific grave again, except to place some flowers on it one time, as was my habit every once in a while, since nobody visited that place anymore. Story 2. At the end of the tour, sometimes I would get tips if people had fun/got spooked. Older boomer and Gen X men really enjoy the charade of the covert handshake tip, where they palm you the money as they shake your hand. I always indulged the bit, because hey, I was getting a tip. One tour I ran had a family of 3, mother, father, daughter, and an older man who I initially thought was grandpa, but later learned had been lumped into their group because we didn't run solo tours. The old guy was pretty quiet throughout the tour but would occasionally ask very pointed questions that stood out to me as odd. I don't remember most of his questions anymore, this was years ago, but one example is that I was telling a story of a girl who fell from a balcony and her ghost haunts the river she plummeted into to this day, and he asked me if I thought she died right away when she hit the ground, or whether I thought she died slow and suffered. Just weird things like that. Well, at the end of the tour, the family took off into the graves to have a look about, see if ghosts would show up in their pictures, etc. The old man came to give me that typical handshake, and mentally I was thinking that all his weird behavior could be easily forgotten if he tipped well. The handshake was normal except that his hand was ice cold, but old folks have cold hands, so I didn't think about it too much. Except he didn't palm me $1, he palmed me a coin. I thought it was a $50 when I felt it at first, but it was too big. I turned to glance at the guy as he walked past me to leave, and I kid you not, he was just gone. The path leaving the graveyard was downhill and you had visibility from the top for at least 300 feet or 100 meters. There was no way he could have covered that distance in that time, and I didn't even hear running. Just this old, tottering man in front of me 1 second and gone in the blink of an eye when he walked past me. When I got home and looked up the coin, I learned it was 1 troy-ounce silver bullion. Minted to an older year, I don't remember exactly. I can check the year when I get home this evening if anyone cares. Overall, the experience left me a little shocked, and the family agreed he was really odd when I walked them back to their car. Apparently, the guy greeted their daughter by name when they arrived at the meetup spot a few minutes before me, but they had no idea who he was. Story 3. So, 2 weird experiences, but no ghostly apparitions or demonic screams. Unfortunately, most nights on the ghost tour were entirely mundane. However, I have got one more odd story I experienced which really set my belief of ghosts in stone. One of the earlier stops in our tour was an old cabin where the town's progenitor once lived. The cabin has been moved around a couple of times to build parking garages but has since been placed back in its original spot. We don't actually have a photo of the woman who founded the town, but we have got pictures of her granddaughter, who everyone at the time swore was a dead ringer for her grandmother. Because of this, an old black and white photo of her granddaughter is on the sign outside the cabin. The cabin is kept locked up with a padlock at all times except when the Historical Society opens it up for school groups. The windows are so dirty you can't see inside, and most of the time it's too dark to get a decent look inside anyway. Regardless, I like to encourage people to peek through the cracks in the old wood because they'd psyche themselves into thinking they saw something move, and a spooky tour is a tour with good tips. Anyway, one night after I did the whole chapel about her founding the town, and how people say they can see her ghost within the cabin on some nights to this day, I let them all have a go at peeking inside. One of the younger teens in the group approached me after looking inside, and we had a very odd conversation. These kids, 13 to 16, usually think it makes them cool to be skeptical and show everyone they're not scared. So, he asked me something like,
"Who's in the costume?"
I was a little confused and explained how the photo on the sign a picture of the granddaughter of the town's founder is, but that she wasn't wearing a costume, that was how people dressed at the time. The little dummy rolled his eyes and told me he meant the woman in the cabin. Of course, I had to have a look, so I peeked through, and sure enough, a streetlight was shining through the dirty windows and letting in a diffused sort of light, and you could just make out a figure in a rocking chair sitting in the corner of the dark cabin, rocking back and forth. It was hard to get a good look at her, but from what I saw, she did look just like the woman in the photo. I moved the group on pretty fast because quite frankly, I was a little afraid it was a homeless person who'd broken in somehow. If it was, I had a group of 6 kids and 1 parent, homeschoolers I think. I didn't want anybody getting hurt or snatched. But I stopped by the cabin again on the way to my car, and the lock was on tight and undamaged. I peeked inside again, and there wasn't even a rocking chair in the cabin. In the whole time I worked the tour route, roughly 2 years, I never saw a chair in that cabin again. Or any old woman, for that matter. So anyway, those are my stories. I know they aren't as sensational as some, but I thought I'd share my experiences with you all. I have a few more odd stories that I can share if you like, but they're all more explainable by mundane means, if not still creepy and odd.
If you're enjoying today's video about stories of our lives, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel to see more videos like this and more. Now, let's get back to the video. Caught what was possibly a cryptid attempting to enter my home uninvited. This happens about 1 year ago during the summer. Something you should keep in mind is that the house I had lived in had 1 acre of land surrounding the house. Where I had lived was near farmland. I had woken up around 8 in the morning on my living room couch, having fallen asleep the previous night, as well as my mother and sister who were sleeping beside me. I had planned to watch this movie I hadn't finished the previous night on my laptop, as well as eating breakfast in the dining room of my house. I had sat down at the end of the dining table, which was the closest chair to the kitchen.
Keep in mind, if I leaned back in my chair, I could see onto the farther side of the kitchen, where the door that led to the deck was, which had this huge window right next to the door. So, I turn on my movie and start to eat my breakfast as my dog trotted over to me and sat next to me. I believe I was about 45 minutes into the movie when my dog had switched her spot, now sitting right under the archway that led to the kitchen, staring at God knows what. I felt her move, but I didn't really think anything of it. If it was serious, she would have been barking like hell. About 10 to 20 minutes go by, and I glance over at my dog, noticing she's still staring at something. This time, I heard shuffling or scratching over in the kitchen. I called out her name, but she just wouldn't move, so when I walked over, I followed her trail of vision and noticed that she was staring at the window in the kitchen that leads to the deck of the house. I nearly crapped myself when I saw something, or somebody behind the window outside, peeping through the blinds. I forgot to mention there was a chair on the deck, right under that specific window. So, whatever the hell that was had to have been balancing on the chair to look inside. It looked bald almost, and white with a pinkish tone. It had been holding onto the window frame, peering at my dog and me, while scratching the screen on the window with this horrible heavy breathing. I remember thinking in the moment it was a person trying to break in, because whatever it was wanted to get in so desperately. The thing was sort of small, and it seemed as if it didn't want me to see the rest of its face, only its eyes. This whole time my dog had been watching whatever that thing was, and not barking. I'm saying this because something as simple as dropping a cup will send my dog into a fit, barking like crazy. Even a voice coming from the TV would cause a great couple of minutes of barking from her. Now, as I said, I believed someone was trying to get in, so I ran over to the couch in the living room, shaking my mother awake, and bringing her to the kitchen. And of course, whatever the hell it was had simply disappeared. I would have thought I was losing my mind if my dog hadn't been seeing the same thing as me. I peered out another window checking the driveway in case it was a person, and they had driven a car here, but there was nothing of the sort. My mother went out onto the deck and looked around, but there was nothing there, except fingerprints on the window frame. We checked around the whole yard and nothing was found except for the prints. I'm quite traumatized to this day, knowing that whatever that had been watching me for quite a while and I didn't know. And also, the fact that, if it was a person, it would take a while to get off of the land. Even if they tried running away, we would have caught them, because of the huge yard. I'm not living in the house where this happened anymore, thankfully. I've had other scary experiences in the house, but those are stories for another day.
I think there's a little girl in my apartment playing tricks on my roommate and me. First and foremost, I believe in ghosts. There was one at my childhood home and there was another at my aunt's house, so I'm pretty sensitive to spirits. But nothing like this has ever happened. I had my car keys placed in my jacket pocket after I was walking a dog I was boarding. Afterwards, I went into my room to take a nap. When it was time to go, I couldn't find my keys anywhere. And I mean, I spent a long time tearing up my room and the living room looking for them. Thankfully, I had a spare. The next day, I tried looking for them again and nothing, and I'm talking about tearing the whole place apart. I was beginning to think they were gone for good. After searching, I gave up and went to my room, but before I could enter, I heard someone call my name. They had a very high-pitched, soft feminine voice and were distant, like it was coming from downstairs. I said what's up because I assumed it was my roommate, but she responded, huh. Her room is across from mine, so her voice was quite loud. I said, you just called my name, and she said no, I didn't. Then the next day I came home from a date and sat on my couch, and they were right on the coffee table. I looked at my roommate and said, where'd you find my keys? And she said she didn't even realize they were there because she hadn't been downstairs. I started freaking out and was like, okay, tell me you're joking, because how did they get there? After this, it made me think back to when my roommate couldn't find her keys that she always places in her tote bag, to then find them hours later in a jacket she hasn't worn in weeks. And both of us have been having major trouble sleeping. Not sure if it's correlated, but when I used to live at my parents' house, there was a ghost that always kept me from sleeping. I was only able to sleep at school or someone else's house.
Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed today's video, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel to see more videos about stories of our lives. Click on one of these videos to watch more and see you soon.